Joey Bishop finally told the dark truth about the Rat Pack in his last days. He was their main comic, but there was a big problem going on behind the scenes. There were million-dollar offers for Frank Sinatra, but he turned them down. This is the shocking reason why he was erased from Hollywood history. The best theater group in the U.S. tried to hide this story. Joey Bishop was born in the Bronx, New York, on February 3, 1918. His full name is Joseph Abraham Gottlieb. He was the fifth child in a Jewish family that moved to the United States. His father, Jacob, fixed bikes for a living, and his mother took care of the house. It was easy but hard to live. His family moved to South Philadelphia when Joey was 3 months old. He spent his childhood in that place, which helped him become the person he is today. South Philadelphia was lively. It was loud in the streets. People lived close to each other, and everyone had a story to tell. Since Joey grew up in an area with a lot of Italian and Jewish people, laughter was a normal part of life. People made fun of each other's troubles and made them seem worse than they really were. He took it all in. He was good at making people laugh, even when he was a child. He began with little things. He tried to look like well-known stars like Jimmy Durante and Edward G. Robinson. He learned new things like how to play the mandolin and the banjo and how to tap dance. He was good at performing, but not so good at school. It was hard for him to keep up in class, and when he was 18, he chose to quit. In order to pay his family, he had to work. Their bicycle repair shop run by his dad barely kept them going. Joey did a lot of different jobs to help out, but he always had a bigger plan in mind. He saw how making people laugh could bring them together. He made his friends laugh by acting like teachers. He looked at the weird things people did in his neighborhood and made fun of them. He was setting himself up for a future in comedy without even realizing it. He never left his house to be funny, even when he was having money problems. His family pushed him to be creative. They saw how easy it was for him to get their attention. He wasn't too loud or annoying. His comedy was soft and seemed to come naturally. He was able to tell jokes with a straight face that made them funny. That style would later make him stand out in show business. Joey wanted to be a serious comedian, but it wasn't easy for him to start. He competed in amateur events to get a chance to act. To win $3 in a neighborhood contest in 1936, he had to copy radio comics. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him believe he was unique. That's where he got his big break. And show they did together was funny, and they were called the Bishop Trio. Their driver, Glenn Bishop, came up with the name. They changed their name to the Bishop Brothers when other artists joined. In Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they did shows in small bars and burlesque houses. It was hard to do well in these places. There were a lot of people. The pay was not much. Joey had to work hard to get attention, but that made him stronger. He learned how to read a room. He changed his jokes based on who was listening. He didn't miss a beat when he switched from one act to another. He wasn't like most entertainers at the time. He wasn't relying on silly jokes or loud punchlines. He was funny but not loud. People loved that. The act was short-lived. One of them was drafted when World War II broke out. Soon after, Joey was also asked to serve. He joined the U.S. Army in 1942 and worked his way up to sergeant in the Special Forces. He kept being funny even when he was in the service. It was his job to keep the troops happy and upbeat. Being on stage in front of other soldiers gave him new courage. It gave Joey Bishop a new drive to return to comedy after World War II. He had been in a small act called the Bishop Brothers before the war. It was a mix of music and comedy, but in 1941, when his friends were called up, he had to keep going by himself. His quick wit and ability to make people laugh would soon make him stand out, so he kept the stage name and kept going. After getting out of the Army in 1945, he didn't wait long to get back on stage. He first played in small places in New Jersey, like the Casablanca Roadhouse. Even though there weren't many people there, he knew that each show was an opportunity to get better. His funny stuff wasn't like the loud and crazy stuff that was famous at the time. He didn't use big movements or over-the-top jokes. Instead, he kept things short and simple. He laughed at himself and everyday things, and he talked in a way that felt like it was to someone. It worked. It only took him a few years to play in bigger venues like the Greenwich Village Inn and the Latin Quarter in New York. For a young comic in the late 1940s, making $1,000 a week was a lot of money. For artists, TV was becoming the biggest stage at the same time. Bishop knew this was what he needed to do next, so he jumped at every chance. He started going on variety shows like The Ed Sullivan Show in 1950. This made him famous all over the country. But his big break came when Frank Sinatra saw him play in a club. As it turned out, Sinatra was in the Latin Quarter in 1952, while Bishop was on stage. Sinatra was interested in the way he timed and delivered his lines. When the show was over, Bishop was asked to open for him at Bill Miller's Riviera in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Soon after, he was playing at New York's Copacabana. A lot of people came to these big sites across the country. He was more than just a star. He changed kings. Doors would open if he liked you. This is what they did for Bishop. People began to call him Sinatra's clown, but he wasn't just making money off of Sinatra's fame. Not like other comics. He had something unique about him. His jokes were never rude or loud. He didn't insult people or put on crazy shows. He laughed at himself instead, which made people feel like they were in on the joke. The way he talked to the crowd was one of his best tricks. They felt like friends when he called them folks. He did more than just joke around. He told stories. He always made things sound funnier than they were when he talked about his childhood. Because his family was so poor, he had to use in the cold. That was one of his favorite lines. It was easy and worked. People laughed because they thought it was true. Bishop stood out in a time when comedy was full of big characters because he could connect with people. He stayed cool and sure of himself while others yelled or played crazy characters. Even though his job was just beginning, he was already showing that he didn't have to be the loudest person in the room to make people laugh. Joey Bishop was the Rat Pack's quiet leader. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. got all the attention, but Bishop worked behind the scenes to shape their humor and keep the act sharp. He was the group's comedian, the one whose dry, easy wit rounded out their crazy personalities. Because he always looked serious, they called him the Frown Prince, something that made their efforts stand out. In the early 1950s, he began his path into the Rat Pack. Sinatra was impressed right away when he saw him play at the Latin Quarter in Manhattan. When Bishop told jokes, they always felt spontaneous and not forced. That made Sinatra happy. He put Bishop on as his opening act, which changed Bishop's future for good. By soon, Bishop was a regular in Sinatra's life. He performed for packed houses and shared the stage with the biggest stars in Hollywood. The Rat Pack was at the top of their game by 1960. They were more than just a bunch of artists. They were a big deal in culture. People loved their late-night shows at the Sand Hotel in Las Vegas. People crowded into the showroom, excited to see the mix of music, comedy, and crazy shenanigans. What most people didn't know was that Bishop wrote a lot of it. He came up with the jokes and small talk that made the show seem natural. He was good at making each person's attitude work against each other, making it seem like everything happened right then. He did make sure everything went well behind the scenes, though. Bishop helped shape the group's sense of fun, but he mostly stayed out of the way. Sinatra and Martin were the big names that everyone wanted to see. Bishop didn't seem to care. He kept things from going totally off the rails because he was always there. Bishop always had a one-liner ready for when the jokes got too crazy or the show started to lose its way. His humor gave the group structure, which is something that is easy to forget but hard to replace. It wasn't just on stage that he worked with the Rat Pack. In movies like Ocean's 11 and Sergeant 3, where he was in, his comedy timing made the group work better together. But when he held John F. Kennedy's inaugural gala in 1961, it was one of the most important events in his career. The Rat Pack had been very supportive of Kennedy's campaign, and this event showed how much power they had. It was more than just a show. It was a historical event. Bishop's job was to keep the night going by mixing fun with the formality of the event. He did a great job with it. He told them, "I told you I'd get you a good seat," when the Kennedys showed up. The crowd loved it. Even though it was short, it made Bishop so important. He was strong enough to stand up to the country's most important people. Don't try too hard to make them laugh. There was trouble going on behind the scenes while Joey Bishop was having a great time with the Rat Pack. His friendship with Frank Sinatra, which used to be strong, began to weaken in the early 1960s. Sinatra finally lost it when he asked Bishop to fill in for him at the Kelneva Lodge, a lodge that Sinatra owned in part. Sinatra wanted them to be loyal. He believed Bishop would seize the chance with both hands. Bishop didn't agree, though. Instead, he gave them a list of requests. He needed $50,000 and his own jet. He thought this was a slap in the face. Bishop was now a part of the Rat Pack because of him. He made him famous. Bishop was now acting like he was helping Sinatra out. He didn't like that. Because he was loyal, Sinatra had built his business. He was hoping for the same in return. It hurt to feel betrayed by Bishop's requests. That was it. Sinatra stopped him. Bishop wasn't one of the rats. He wasn't just upset about being kicked out of the group. Sinatra made sure that big projects didn't include him. Bishop was in mind when Robin and the Seven Hoods were first planned. This time, he was changed. It was easy to understand. He was no longer wanted. Bishop was hit hard by this. He already thought he was the least important person in the group. That was it. He was no longer inside. His request didn't work out. He lost everything instead of getting more respect. He became angry because of it. He was mad at more than just Sinatra. He was angry about the whole business. Even though he worked hard, he always looked like he was behind someone else. Someone else in the Rat Pack knew how you felt. It was different for him, but his problems were just as stressful. Lawford was well known in Hollywood because he was married to John F. Kennedy's brother. But there were some problems with that link as well. His political ties sometimes got in the way of his playing career. There were no open fights between him and Bishop, but they both felt like outsiders. Bishop felt even worse about being turned down. He missed out on important things. When Johnny Carson was picked to host a big charity event, it was one of the worst times. Bishop may have had that spot in the past. Now he was being switched out. There was life in show business without him. Bishop never forgot how that made him feel. He didn't talk about what had happened very often, but he didn't hide how angry he was either. It was in interviews that he said small things about feeling underappreciated. He didn't like how the media talked about him. Someone told him he was lucky to be in the Rat Pack, like he hadn't worked hard to get there. That hurt. Bishop could not forget the past, even after many years had passed. He had other jobs after the Rat Pack, but they were what made him famous. He had been a part of something epic. He had been pushed out of it too. That cut never got better. You could always count on Joey Bishop to be in the news. His job had good and bad times, but he kept going. It was partly based on his life, and he played the lead role in the Joey Bishop Show in 1961. Joey Barnes is a Hollywood PR man that he played. He could show off his funny side on the show, but it had trouble getting viewers from the start. NBC showed the first season in black and white. After a year, the network changed it to color, which made it stand out. At the time, Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas were two of the biggest names in TV, and this was one of their first color comedies. Abby Dalton played Joey's wife, and Corbett Monica played his best friend. Even though guest stars like Andy Williams and Jimmy Durante made the show more interesting, it never really took off. NBC stopped it in 1964. It was a dangerous choice for CBS to pick it up. The show came back in black and white. People were already used to color TV by that time. It felt wrong to go backwards. The show's numbers kept going down, even with big names like Peter Lawford and Sammy Davis Jr. as guests. After a year, CBS ended the show for good. One of the strangest things that has ever happened on the show featured comedian Von Meter. He was well known for pretending to be President John F. Kennedy. He'd tape an episode of The Joey Bishop Show on November 15, 1963. A week after that, Kennedy was killed. The episode was never shown again because NBC chose not to air it. It is still lost to this day. Joey Bishop became a well-known TV personality thanks to the show, even though it wasn't a big hit. He was still not done. That year, 1967, he took on an even bigger task. He got his own late-night talk show on ABC, which was also called The Joey Bishop Show. He was up against Johnny Carson this time, who is the king of late-night TV. It was hard to go up against The Tonight Show. A lot of people had tried before him. Most of them had failed. Bishop's show was different. It felt more casual and like a discussion. He got Regis Philbin to work with him, which was Philbin's first big break on national TV. The show had musical performances, talks with famous people, and comedy sketches. Tom Lawford and Sammy Davis Jr. sometimes showed up out of the blue. Ratings were never very good, no matter what was done. Carson had a loyal crowd that didn't want to switch shows. Bishop knew how to get people's attention, though. Something strange happened in July 1968. Regis Philbin quit the show live on air. He said he was fed up with the network's attacks and thought he was stopping the show. People were shocked by what happened, and the story made the news. The truth came out in the end. He planned the whole thing as a PR stunt. It worked for a short time. People watched because they were interested in what would happen next. The numbers went up, but they didn't last. They ended the show in 1969 after 2 seasons on ABC. Bishop was still a well-known face on TV, even though his late-night show didn't last. As a guest host on The Tonight Show, he did things he had done before he had his own show. Bishop was one of the few people who could fill in for Carson when they were sick or away. Joey Bishop felt like he was being left behind as the 1970s went on. The humor was changing quickly. There were now a lot of new comics, and their style was very different from his. The way was being paved by Richard Pryor and George Carlin. They weren't just making fun of each other. They were making a point by making funny situations from real life that felt real and raw. Pryor was honest about his life, from his hard childhood to his problems with drugs. His stories were more than just funny. They were feeling sad. They were real. Carlin, on the other hand, was mean to everyone and everything. People thought a lot while they laughed at his sharp takes on politics and everyday life. Bishop had made a name for himself by using smart wordplay and quick quips. His sense of humor worked great in bars and on late-night TV. But that style didn't seem right now. People wanted something different. They were looking for funny things that broke the rules. They wanted funny things that were personal. Bishop was not that kind of funny, and he didn't want to become one. Not only did the change in entertainment hurt him, but other things did too. He was no longer in the Rat Pack, and his relationship with Sinatra had never been stable. He didn't have as many business contacts as he did before, which made it harder for him to stay relevant. He wasn't just being pushed out by younger people. People had forgotten about him. Bishop's work had almost stopped by the 1980s. He had a few movie parts, but they were not very common. And in 1986, he had a small part in the action movie The Delta Force, which starred Chuck Norris. Even though the movie was a hit, Bishop's part didn't get much attention. In 1996, he was in the movie Mad Dog Time, which was directed by his son Larry Bishop. Even though it was his own project, it didn't make him famous again. He wasn't in the entertainment business because he didn't have any work. It came about after years of failures. He lost power when he broke up with the Rat Pack. Because he wouldn't change, he was out of touch. Funny things had changed, but Bishop stayed the same. People who used to praise him had moved on without him. He got married to Sylvia Ruska in 1941. They were together for 58 years, until 1999, when Sylvia died of cancer. Their marriage made it through the good times and bad times in Hollywood, even when Bishop had to be away for long periods of time for work. Much of his time was spent on stage with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. as a part of the Rat Pack. Living like that would put a lot of stress on any marriage, but Sylvia stood by him. She took care of their house, raised their son, and made sure their family was strong while Bishop went on trips across the country. It took trust for them to be together. It didn't matter how long they were apart. They always found their way back to each other. Sylvia was strong in a quiet way that kept everything in order. She dealt with the stress of being famous without trying to get noticed for herself. Bishop may have been the center of attention, but she was the one who kept him going. Larry was their only child. He was born in 1948. He grew up in Hollywood, but he made his own way in the business instead of depending on his father's fame. Aside from acting, writing, and directing, he went to Beverly Hills High School. He became known for his early parts in movies like Wild in the Streets and The Savage Seven. He then went on to direct movies like Mad Dog Time and Hell Ride. His friendship with Bishop was never very close, even though they both went down similar paths. Their personal lives were affected by the fact that Bishop was often away, either working on stage or on TV. They had respect for each other, but there wasn't a strong emotional link. Larry has talked about how his father helped him in his work, but their relationship was always formal and not very warm. There was something else about Bishop that made him stand out in the Rat Pack. He was known for being smart and funny. He didn't use drugs or drink. Sinatra, Martin, and Davis Jr. were known for having crazy nights, but Bishop stayed away from that way of life. He tried to keep his cool because he knew how easy it was for success to turn into self-destruction. It wasn't about being better than other people. He only wanted to be in charge. That was something his friends liked about him. Even when the parties went late into the night, Bishop was the one who kept things in check. After Sylvia died, everything changed. She had held him down, the person who kept him in touch with people outside of Hollywood. Without her, he pulled away. He went out less and didn't hang out with other people very often. His health was already getting worse, but losing Sylvia made it even worse. His home in Newport Beach became a place for him to get away from the stress of his past. That house had a story. On their way back from Mexico in the late 1970s, Bishop and Sylvia ran into a very bad storm. The wind was 60 knots, and the waves were 16 feet high. They just about made it to safety before they sank at the Newport Beach Balboa Bay Club. Soon after, they made up their minds to buy a house on Lido Isle because of that moment. It turned into a safe place for them to get away from the chaos of Hollywood. There was only one member of the Rat Pack left alive, Joey Bishop, but he never felt like an equal. His job was to make people laugh while the other performers sang and did other things. Sinatra once called him the hub of the big wheel, which meant he was important. Bishop never thought that the group really saw him that way, though. He always felt like he was the most ignored member, and that thought stayed with him for years. He saw something that worried him every time he read books about the Rat Pack. Only a few times did his name show up, sometimes even less than Peter Lawford's. It was hard to accept that. It got even worse after reading a piece by Earl Wilson. It was said that Bishop only spent time with Sinatra when he was asked, like he was a guest. Bishop knew it was wrong. He knew where he fit in. He wasn't in charge. That being said, he was a big part of why their shows worked. It wasn't because Sinatra was nice to him. He was there because he fit. Bishop was angry with Sinatra, but he never turned against him. He looked up to him. He often told people that Sinatra cared most about being honest. Pope liked telling the story of a young woman who wanted to meet Sinatra. Sinatra made sure she had the chance. He was nice to her and respected her. Bishop told those kinds of stories about Sinatra so that people could see the real man behind the crazy, over-the-top persona that everyone thought they knew. Bishop cared a lot about loyalty. That's why he wouldn't write a tell-all book after Sinatra died. Publishers offered him millions of dollars to tell secret stories. He said no to all of them, though. He thought it was a lie. The Rat Pack had made something great, and he wasn't going to give it up just so everyone could talk about it. Bishop also didn't like how their history had been changed over time. People were interested in the drinking, the parties, and the stories. They didn't look at how the Rat Pack really affected people. They changed fun things to do. They stood up for equal rights for people of color. Because Sammy Davis Jr. was black, hotels in Las Vegas wouldn't let him stay. The Rat Pack wouldn't play there until that changed. People should remember stories like that, Bishop said. His own job had good and bad times. He was the star of the Joey Bishop Show for 4 years, but his late-night talk show didn't do well. Johnny Carson was the king of late-night TV. Bishop's team made sure that famous people didn't show up to his show. He couldn't do much about that, but it hurt his chances. He sometimes felt like he was forgotten, even in the Rat Pack. Though some people didn't always see it, he was the one who made their shows funny. Some people only saw him as an extra and thought they were lucky to be there. He never liked how people thought about him that way. He was happy with what he had done. No one could take away the fact that he had spent his whole life making people laugh. In 2005, his health was getting worse. During one of his last talks, he got lost and couldn't go on. After 2 years, on October 17, 2007, he died at the age of 89. His death put an end to the first Rat Pack. Bishop left behind a difficult legacy. He was in one of the most famous singing groups in history, but he often felt like no one liked him. But he never let anger define who he was. He stuck to his beliefs, wouldn't betray his friends, and believed that what they had built together was still important. Even though people didn't always praise him, he knew he had helped make something great happen. That was enough in the end.